I was crushing garlic when the text came through. The scent of rosemary clung to my fingertips, sharp and green, grounding me in the small comfort of routine. The lamb was already marinating in a ceramic bowl, glossy with olive oil and red wine. I had been looking forward to that dinner all week. I'd imagined Lily in her high chair, kicking her heels against the wood. I'd imagined Leo carving the roast the way he used to help me slice turkey on Thanksgiving, proud and careful. I'd imagined Isabel smiling tightly but tolerating me. My phone buzzed again. "You're not invited to dinner. I don't want you here." That was all. No greeting, no explanation, no apology disguised as concern. Just a door slammed shut in 12 words. For a moment I stood perfectly still. The kitchen clock ticked. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car passed slowly, music drifting faintly through open windows. The world continued as if nothing had shifted. But something inside me had. I read the message again. I waited for the second bubble, the correction, the sorry wrong person, the "we just need to talk first." Nothing came. I typed one word, "okay." My thumb hovered over the send button for a full 10 seconds before I pressed it. The quiet that followed felt different than before. Not empty. Not wounded. Clear. I turned off the oven. I covered the lamb and slid it into the refrigerator. I washed my hands slowly, watching rosemary leaves spiral down the drain. Then I walked to my desk. The black ledger was exactly where I'd always kept it. Third drawer down. Beneath old warranties and expired insurance policies, I opened it and ran my hand over the pages. Every entry was written in blue ink, need and date as in, wedding DJ 2500 house deposit, force 280, hospital bill adjustment 40, monthly car insurance. The 110 streaming services annual renewal, 150 entries. 4 years of love translated into numbers. I didn't cry, I didn't rage, I didn't call Leo and demand an explanation. Instead I opened my banking app. The automatic rent support paused. The monthly grocery card, deactivated. The shared account's passwords changed. I moved through each action with the same calm precision I used when trimming fat from meat. Clean cuts. No hesitation. When I finished, I sat back in my chair and waited for something to rise in me. Gelby. Fear. Loneliness. What I felt instead was something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. The first message came the next morning. "Hey Catherine, did something happen with the rent transfer?" I left it unread. An hour later. "Netflix isn't working." By evening, the grocery card was declined. Is there a mistake? There was. Fourth day, Leo called. I watched his name flash across the screen. My sweet boy. The child who once cried because he thought a spider in his room might be cold. The teenager who mic'd me after his first heartbreak and whispered, "You're my favorite person, Mom." I let it ring. He called again. And again. At the end of the week 66 missed calls sat like a monument to panic. Not once had he asked how I was. Not once had he said, "Mom, what happened?" Only logistics. Only disruption. I began sleeping through the night. 2 weeks later a letter arrived. Not a text, not a voicemail. A letter written in Leo's uneven handwriting. "Mom, I'm sorry. I don't know when I stopped seeing you as a person and started seeing you as support. I was trying to keep peace. I didn't realize what that cost you. I miss you, not the help. You." I read it 3 times. The paper trembled slightly in my hands. There it was, the crack in the armor. The flicker of the boy I had raised. But regret written in ink is easier than change lived in action. I didn't respond. 3 days later there was a knock at my door. Leo stood there holding Lily. He looked thinner. Tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. "Mom," he said softly. Lily reached for me immediately, her tiny fingers opening and closing in the air. I stepped aside. He sat at my kitchen table, the same place where he used to do homework, and stared at his hands. "She left," he said. The words fell heavy. "Said I had to suitcase." "Said," I asked quietly. He swallowed. I didn't realize I already had. Silence stretched between us, but it wasn't hostile. It was honest. "You let me disappear," I said. "I know. You watched her push me out, I know. You only noticed when the money stopped." That one made him flinch. I didn't understand how bad it was. He whispered. I thought keeping quiet was protecting everyone. Keeping quiet protects the loudest person in the room. I replied. Lily babbled softly in my arms, unaware of the history being untangled above her head. I don't want your money, he said. I want a chance to fix this. Fixing isn't words, I said. He nodded. He started coming by twice a week, not to ask, just to sit. Sometimes we barely spoke. Sometimes he told me about therapy. About the fights I hadn't seen. About the way Isabel had framed my generosity as control. I thought I was being a good husband, he said one afternoon. But I was just being afraid. Afraid of what? That she'd leave. And she did anyway, he gave a hollow laugh. Yeah. The custody battle came next. Isabel wanted weekends, the house, and full access to the joint account. She wanted leverage. Leo looked overwhelmed when he told me. I can't fight her like this. He admitted. You can, I said. You just don't do it with money. You do it with preparation. I handed him a lawyer's card. I'm not paying, I added before he could speak. I know, he said quickly. And this time he meant it. He picked up extra shifts. He sold his motorcycle. He learned how to budget. He showed up to court prepared. The judge ruled joint custody. The financial claims were denied. Isabel's messages grew shorter after that. Then stopped altogether. The first night Lily slept over officially. She stood in my guest room clutching a small stuffed rabbit. Grandma, she whispered, sing. So I did. The same lullaby I had sung to Leo when thunderstorms rattled the windows. My voice cracked on the high notes. But Lily didn't seem to notice. She fell asleep with her fingers tangled in my sweater. I sat there long after she drifted off. I realized something then. I hadn't lost my son. I had lost access to him while he figured out who he was. And now he was figuring it out. Trust did not return in a single moment. It rebuilt itself slowly, in consistent visits, in honest conversations, in the absence of expectation. One evening, Leo stood in my kitchen again, watching me cook. You're different, he said. So are you. He smiled faintly. No. I mean, you don't jump in to fix everything. I don't need to. Doesn't it bother you? Of course it does. But loving someone doesn't mean preventing them from struggling. He was quiet for a long time. I'm proud of you, I said finally. His eyes filled unexpectedly. For what? For staying. The house felt full again but not crowded. Peace had edges now. Boundaries that held it in place. Months later, Isabel sent a message. Hope you're enjoying playing house. I stared at it for a moment. Then I deleted it. Control had been her language. Silence had become mine. Leo began bringing groceries when he visited. Small things at first, coffee. Then more. He fixed the loose hinge on my cabinet without being asked. He mowed the lawn one Saturday morning while Lily chased Bubbles in the yard. Why are you doing all this? I asked gently. He shrugged. Because I want to. Not because I owe you. Because I'm your son. That distinction mattered. One night, after Lily had gone home, he lingered by the door. I used to think you'd always be there no matter what, he admitted. I will be, I said. But not at the cost of myself. He nodded slowly. I understand that now, and I believed him. Not blindly, not recklessly. But enough. The ledger still sits in my drawer. I haven't written in it for months. Not because I forgot. But because I no longer need to measure love in numbers. I measure it in effort, in accountability, in the way my son now looks at me when he says goodbye, not distracted, not entitled, but present. The seasons shifted quietly after that. Summer arrived without drama, stretch in gold light across my kitchen floor in the evenings. Leo began bringing Lily every Wednesday and every other weekend, exactly as the court papers required. No more, no less. Structure suited him. It gave him something to hold on to. The first time he arrived 5 minutes late, he apologized before he even stepped inside. Traffic, he said quickly. I should have left earlier. 5 minutes. There was a time he would have been hours late and blamed the world for it. It's fine, I told him. And it was. Lily had started talking more. Real sentences now. Questions that tumbled out in breathless curiosity. Grandma, why moon follow car? Grandma. Why tomatoes smell green? She had Leo's eyes but Isabel's sharp chin. Sometimes that resemblance startled me. I had to remind myself that children are not battlegrounds. They are bridges. One evening, after Lily had fallen asleep on the couch with a bookman on her chest, Leo and I sat in the quiet. I read through those messages again, he said. I knew which ones. I don't recognize the man who ignored that, he continued. I keep thinking, how did I let someone talk about you like that? You didn't want to see it, I said gently. Seeing it would have required action. He nodded. I was weak. You were afraid, I corrected. There's a difference. Weakness refuses to grow, fear can learn. He absorbed that slowly. He had started therapy twice a week. He talked about it openly now, about boundaries, about people pleasing, about the way he had confused love with compliance. I thought being a good husband meant siding with her no matter what. He admitted. It means having a spine, I said. Even when it shakes. He smiled faintly at that. The custody exchanges grew colder over time. Isabel rarely stepped out of her car. Sometimes she didn't come at all, sending her sister instead. Leo stopped reacting outwardly, but I could see the tension in his shoulders each time. One Saturday, Lily returned unusually quiet. She cried when I dropped her off. Leo told me. Isabel says I'm manipulating her. That Lily prefers it here because you spoil her. Do I? I asked. He gave me a look. You make pancakes shaped like stars. That's not spoiling. That's creativity. But later, when Lily sat at my kitchen table drawing with crayons, I asked gently, do you feel funny when you go back to Mommy's? She shrugged, her small face serious. Mommy sad. How does that make you feel? Like I have to be big. The words lodged in my chest. Children should not feel responsible for adult emotions. That night after Leo picked her up, I sat alone in my living room and thought about cycles. About how easily they repeat if no one interrupts them. I had interrupted one. It had cost me comfort. It had cost me illusion. But it had given me clarity. Autumn crept in. Leaves gathered along the edges of the yard. Leo began cooking more confidently. He sent me pictures of meals he made on his own, nothing extravagant, but solid. Responsible. I didn't realize how much you handled, he said once, half ashamed. Even when I moved out, you were still there. I liked being needed. I made me feel important. You are important, he said immediately. That's different, I replied. Being needed can become addictive. It blinds you. He thought about that for a long time. One afternoon, Isabel called me directly. Her name flashing on my phone no longer made my stomach twist. It simply registered as information, I answered. I assume you're happy, she said without greeting. About what? About everything falling apart. I didn't break your marriage, I said calmly. Silence doesn't destroy what's healthy. She scoffed. You turned him against me. No, I replied. I stopped paying for his confusion. There was a pause on the line. You always thought you were better than me, she said finally. No, I answered. I just refused to compete. She hung up. I sat with the quiet afterward, noticing something almost startling. I felt no anger. Only distance. Winter arrived early that year. The first snow fell thick and fast, covering the yard in clean white. Leo brought Lily over bundled like a small marshmallow, her cheeks pink from the cold. Snow. She shouted as soon as she stepped inside, as if I hadn't noticed. We built a snowman together. Leo did most of the heavy lifting, packing the base into a solid mound. I watched him move, stronger now, steadier. Less frantic. At one point he slipped, landing hard on his back. Lily gasped, then burst into giggles when he started laughing too. I found myself laughing with them. Not because everything had healed, but because it was healing. Later, while Lily napped upstairs, Leo stood by the window. She asked me yesterday if I'm happier now. He said quietly. What did you tell her? That I'm trying to be. He turned to me. Are you? The question was honest. Yes, I said. More than before. Especially after everything. He steadied me as if recalibrating his understanding of who I was. I always thought strength was loud, he admitted. Big gestures. Big sacrifices. It can be, I said. But sometimes it's just saying no and meaning it. He exhaled slowly. I'm still learning that. So am I. I replied. In early spring the court finalized custody permanently. Joint, structured, fair. Isabel's attempts at financial leverage were dismissed again. She had already missed several scheduled weekends. She wants control, not consistency, Leo said one evening, exhaustion lining his voice. Then you provide the consistency, I answered. He showed up. Every time, he packed Lily's lunches carefully. He read bedtime stories even when he looked ready to collapse. He stopped asking me for advice before making small decisions. Instead, he'd tell me what he decided. It was subtle, but it mattered. One night after Lily had fallen asleep mid-sentence on my couch, Leo sat across from me with unusual seriousness. I've been thinking about something, he said. That's always dangerous. I smiled, then sobered again. I want to apologize properly. For not just for the text. For the years before it. I didn't interrupt. I let you carry everything, he continued. Financially. Emotionally. I let Isabel frame you as intrusive because it was easier than confronting her. And because it benefited me. He swallowed hard. I treated your love like a utility. Something that would always run. The honesty in his voice cut deeper than any accusation. I forgive you, I said quietly. He looked up sharply. Just like that? No, I said. Not just like that. I forgive you because you changed. Forgiveness without change is permission. This isn't that. His eyes filled, but he didn't look away. I don't deserve you, he whispered. That's not how this works, I replied. We don't deserve people, we choose them. He nodded slowly. And I'm choosing better, he said. That night, after he left, I stood in the kitchen alone again. The same counter. The same quiet hum of the refrigerator. But I was not the same woman. You're not invited to dinner. Those words had once echoed with rejection. Now they felt like a doorway I had walked through. On the other side was not revenge, not victory, but alignment. Leo still struggles sometimes. There are days he arrives tense after difficult exchanges, days when Lily asks complicated questions about why mommy doesn't come to school events. We answer gently, age-appropriate truths. No bitterness. Because legacy isn't about winning. It's about modeling. One evening, as I tucked Lee into bed, she reached up and touched my cheek. Grandma strong, she said sleepily. I smiled. Why? Because you don't cry loud. Children notice more than we think. After she drifted off, I sat in the dim room and allowed myself a single quiet tear. Not from sadness but from release. Strength had not made me hard. It had made me clarity is kinder than compliance ever was. Leo knocked softly on the doorframe. She asleep? Yes. He hesitated. Thank you, he said. For what? For not giving up on me. Even when you stopped giving. I didn't stop giving. I said gently. I just stopped funding disrespect. He smiled at that. A real smile. The kind he used to wear as a child when he'd finally solved a puzzle on his own. Outside the wind moved through the trees. The house felt steady. Peace, I had learned, is not the absence of conflict. It is the presence of boundaries. And for the first time in years, everything inside these walls felt earned. Time did what time always does. It softened sharp edges without erasing the lines that mattered. By the second year, the rhythm between us had settled into something steady. Not the old rhythm, the one where I anticipated needs before they were spoken and filled gaps before they were felt. This was different. Cleaner. Leo had moved into a smaller townhouse closer to Lily's school. He chose it himself, negotiated the lease himself, budgeted carefully. When he showed me the place for the first time, there was a quiet pride in his voice. No co-signers, he said. I know, I replied. He watched my face, almost searching for something, approval maybe. I gave him a nod. It's yours, I said simply, and that was enough. Lily started kindergarten that fall. I stood beside Leo at her first school assembly. Both of us squeezed into tiny folding chairs meant for children. When her name was called, she scanned the crowd nervously until her eyes found us. She waved wildly. Leo waved back with equal enthusiasm. Afterward in the parking lot, she slipped one hand into his and one into mine. "My people," she announced. The phrase settled into my chest like warmth. Not ownership, not possession. Belonging. Isabel remained inconsistent. Some months she showed up exactly on schedule, composed and polite in that brittle way that never quite reached her eyes. Other months she cancelled at the last minute. At first, Leo still reacted. You could see it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his shoulders stiffened. "Don't let unpredictability become your personality," I told him once. He frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means you stay steady even when others don't. Lily needs one fixed point." He nodded slowly, and he became one. There were nights he called me not for money, not for rescue, but just to talk. "Do you ever regret how much you gave?" he asked one evening. "Yes," I answered honestly. He seemed startled. "But not because of the money," I continued. "I regret giving in ways that kept you dependent. I thought I was protecting your growth." He absorbed that quietly. "I don't want to do that with Lily," he said. "You won't," I replied. "Because you fund it from both sides now." Spring came again, and with it, small celebrations. Lily's 6th birthday was held at a modest. Leo planned it carefully, simple decorations. A rented bounce house he paid for himself. When Isabel arrived, she kept her distance. She watched more than she participated. There was something different about her now. Not softer, but quieter. As if the world had stopped rearranging itself around her preferences. At one point, she approached me while Leo helped Lily untangle a ribbon from her hair. "She looks happy," Isabel said flatly. "She is," I replied. "There really stopped everything," she added, not a question. "Yes. I didn't think you would." "I didn't either," I said truthfully. Her eyes flickered with something, regret maybe. Or maybe just recognition that her calculations had been wrong. "You made it look easy," she said. "It wasn't," I answered. "It was necessary." She nodded once. Then walked away. I watched Leo lift Lily into the air as she shrieked with laughter. He caught her securely, effortlessly. He had grown into his strength. That summer, something unexpected happened. Leo started dating again. He told me cautiously, as if waiting for judgment. "She's kind. Patient. Has her own career. Doesn't need me to fix her life." "That's promising," I said lightly. He smiled relieved. "I'm taking it slow." "Good." When I met her, her name was Anna. She shook my hand firmly and looked me directly in the eye. "I've heard a lot about you," she said warmly. "I hope some of it was good." I replied. "It was honest," she said. That mattered more. Anna never asked about money, never hinted. She brought a homemade pie the first time she visited and insisted on washing the dishes afterward. Not performative. Just natural. I watched how Leo interacted with her. He didn't shrink. He didn't overcompensate. He spoke clearly. Disagreed gently when needed. There was no frantic edge to him. After they left that night, I sat alone in the quiet and allowed myself a cautious hope. Growth had not been temporary. Months later, Leo stood in my kitchen again. Nervous in a way I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. "I'm thinking about proposing," he said. I studied him carefully. He blinked. "Because I love her." "Love isn't the only requirement," I said calmly. "I know," he said quickly. "We've talked about expectations, about finances, about boundaries. She knows I won't tolerate disrespect toward you. Toward anyone." "And does she agree?" "Yes." I held his gaze for a long moment. "Then you're not asking my permission," I said. "You're sharing your joy." A slow smile spread across his face. "Yeah," he admitted. "I guess I am." When he proposed, it wasn't extravagant. Just a quiet dinner, a simple ring, a private promise. They told Lily together. She clapped excitedly. "2 houses," she exclaimed. Clearly focused on the logistics, we laughed. The wedding, a year later, was small and intimate. Leo insisted on paying for everything himself. When I offered to contribute, he shook his head gently. "You already did enough," he said. I didn't argue. During the reception, he tapped his glass and stood to speak. "I want to thank my mom." He began, his voice steady but thick with emotion. Not for what she gave me, but for what she stopped giving me. Because that's when I learned who I needed to become. The room was quiet. She showed me that love without boundaries isn't love. It's fear. And she loved me enough to stop being afraid. I felt the familiar sting behind my eyes, but I didn't cry loudly. I didn't need to. After the ceremony, Anna hugged me tightly. "Thank you for raising him," she whispered. "He raised himself," I replied softly. Eventually, years passed the way they do, quietly, steadily. Marked by small milestones instead of dramatic turning points. Lily grew taller. Lost her first tooth at my kitchen table. Asked harder questions about relationships, about choices, about why some families shift shape. We answered honestly. Leo built a career he was proud of. He and Anna bought a home within their means, no secret contributions, no hidden lifelines. And I kept my ledger, not as a weapon, not as leverage, but as a reminder. Sometimes I open it and flip through the pages. I don't feel anger anymore, I feel distance. And gratitude for the lesson written there. One evening, years after that original text, Leo and I stood side by side at my counter again. Rosemary lay scattered across a cutting board. "Smells the same," he said softly. "It always does," I replied. He looked at me carefully. "Do you ever think about that night?" "Yes." "What do you feel?" I considered the question honestly. "Grateful," I said. He frowned slightly. "For being uninvited. For being forced to choose myself." He nodded slowly. "I'm glad you did," he said. "So am I." Lily ran into the kitchen then, breathless and bright. "Dinner ready?" she asked. "Yes," I said smiling. And this time no one had to invite me. I was exactly where I belonged. Years have a way of smoothing what once felt jagged. Lily turned 10. The springy tree in my backyard bloomed fuller than it ever had. She stood beneath it with a book tucked under her arm, already too tall to be carried but still young enough to lean into me without self-consciousness. "Grandma," she asked one afternoon, "were you ever scared of being alone?" The question came out of nowhere, as children's questions often do. "Yes," I said honestly. "When?" "Once," I replied. "Long time ago. I was scared that if I stopped giving, people would stop loving me." She considered that seriously. "That's silly." "It was," I agreed softly. "Because if someone only loves your giving, they don't love you." I smiled at her. "You're learning early." She shrugged. "Dade says you taught him that." I hadn't realized how much he talked about it. Leo had changed in ways that were no longer dramatic, they were foundational. Steady. Boring in the best way. He didn't flare up anymore when Isabel sent difficult messages about schedule swaps or minor complaints. He responded calmly, briefly, without defensiveness. Control had once been a rope around his neck. Now it slipped off him like rain. Isabel's presence in our lives grew thinner over time. She moved to another city eventually. "Career opportunity," she said. Lily adjusted the way children do through routine, reassurance, and consistency. Leo made sure of that. One evening, after Lily had gone upstairs to finish homework, Leo stayed behind at my kitchen table. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I used to measure my worth by how needed I was." I raised an eyebrow. "That sounds familiar." He smiled faintly. "I think I learned it from you." "That's fair," I admitted. "But now," he continued, "I measure it by how steady I am. Even when no one's clapping." "That's growth," I said quietly. He nodded. "It's peaceful." Peace. The word used to sound fragile to me. Like something that could shatter if handled wrong. Now it felt solid. There were still difficult moments. Course. Life doesn't become simple just because lessons are learned. When Lily entered middle school, she went through a phase of testing boundaries, sharp tone. Eye rolls, doors closed a little too firmly. One afternoon she snapped at Leo over something small. I watched from the doorway as he inhaled slowly instead of reacting. "I won't be spoken to like that," he said calmly. "We can try again." No yelling. No overcorrection, just boundary. Later at evening. Lily came downstairs quietly. "Sorry," she muttered. Leo nodded. "Thank you." "And that lecture." "No shame." I caught Leo's eye across the room. He gave me a small look that said, "I see it now. Cycles can end." On my 65th birthday, Leo organized a small dinner. Nothing extravagant, just family, close friends. Laughter echoing warmly against familiar walls. At one point, Anna clinked her glass lightly. "I want to toast Catherine," she said. "For teaching all of us that love without self-respect isn't love at all." Leo reached for my hand under the table. "You changed this family," he added quietly. I shook my head. "I changed myself." "That's the same thing," he replied. I thought about that later, alone in my bedroom after everyone had gone home. How often do we believe we're preserving relationships by shrinking inside them? How often do we confuse sacrifice with virtue? The night I received that text, I thought I was losing everything. But I had been losing myself long before that. Stopping the money hadn't been revenge, it had been a mirror. And when the reflection came back uncomfortable, people had to decide who they were. Leo chose to grow, I chose to stop bending. Years later, the memory of that original message no longer stung. It felt distant, almost like a story someone else had told me. "You're not invited to dinner." It had been meant to exclude. Instead, it initiated. It pushed me into a version of myself that no longer negotiated for space at my own table. One autumn evening, Lily, now nearly grown, sat across from me with serious eyes. "Grandma," she said, "Dad told me there was a time you almost stopped talking." I smiled faintly. "For a while." "Why?" "Because I had been speaking in ways no one respected." She absorbed the "was it hard?" "Yes." "Was it worth it?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes." She nodded slowly. "I think I understand," she said. "There's this friend at school who only calls when she needs homework help. I feel bad saying no." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Saying no to protect your peace is not cruelty," I told her. "It's clarity." She smiled thoughtfully. In that moment, I saw it fully. Legacy is not what you give people, it's what you model for them. Leo stopped by later the night after dropping Lily home. "She's strong," he said. "She gets it." "She does." He leaned back in his chair. Looking around my kitchen, the same granite countertop, the same quiet hum of the refrigerator. "You know," he said softly, "if you had shown up to that dinner anyway, if you had argued, if you had, I would have lost more than an invitation." I finished gently. He nodded. "I'm glad you didn't." "So am I." We sat in companionable silence for a while, no tension, no debt. Just presence. Eventually he stood to leave. "Love you, Mom," he said. The words steady and unforced. "Love you too," I replied. Not because he needed something. Not because I feared losing him. But because we had both earned the simplicity of it. After he left, I stepped outside onto the porch. The evening air was cool. The sky stretched wide and untroubled above me. There was a time I believed love meant constant availability. Now I understood it meant alignment. There was a time I feared being forgotten. Now I knew that being respected mattered more. There was a time I paid for peace. Now I lived in it. And if I could go back to that moment, the rosemary on my fingertips, the buzz of the phone, the sting of those 12 words, I wouldn't change a thing. Because that was the night I finally set my own table. And I have never again waited for someone else to decide whether I belong at it. Life did not become perfect after that, it became real. There is a difference. Perfection is fragile, it depends on everything aligning. Real life bends, stretches, adjusts. It holds even when the wind changes direction. When Lily turned 16, she asked if she could get a part-time job. Leo hesitated. "She doesn't need to," he said automatically. I watched him carefully. "She doesn't need to," I agreed. Maybe she wants to." Lily stood in the doorway, listening. "I want my own money," she said. "Not because you won't give me things. Just because I want to earn them." There it was again. The lesson traveling forward without being announced. Leo looked at her for a long moment. "Okay," he said finally. "We'll talk about hours and school balance." She beamed. Later that evening, when she had gone upstairs, Leo exhaled deeply. "My first instinct was to protect," he admitted. "I know," I said. "I don't want her to struggle." "Struggle builds muscle," I replied gently. "Not sufferin'." He nodded slowly. You let me avoid effort. Yes, I said without defensiveness. And then I stopped. He smiled faintly. Thank God. Anna joined us a few minutes later, carrying tea. She'll be fine, she said confidently. She has two steady parents. I felt something warm settle in my chest at that word. Steady. Not wealthy. Not powerful. Not perfect. Steady. Years earlier, I would have thought steady sounded ordinary. Now I knew it was extraordinary. There were still occasional ripples from Isabel. A late-night message about school decisions. A complaint about travel schedules. Once, a thinly veiled remark about grandparents overstepping. Leo handled them himself. I'll take care of it, he would say calmly. And he did. One afternoon he stopped by unexpectedly. No agenda. Can we talk? He asked. Of course. He sat at the table, running his hands over the wood grain. I've been thinking about something lately, he said. About you. That's dangerous, I teased softly. He didn't smile. I don't think I ever really saw how lonely you were. The statement caught me off guard. I wasn't lonely all the time, I said carefully. But enough, he replied. I didn't answer immediately. He continued. You filled your time with helping us. With giving, and I think part of me knew it. And let you. I looked at him steadily. You were building your life, I said. It wasn't your job to manage mine. But I benefited from it, he insisted. Yes, I agreed. You did. Silence settled between us, but it wasn't heavy. Are you lonely now? He asked quietly. I considered the question honestly. No, I said. And I meant it. After the separation, after the boundaries, after the painful recalibration of what love required, I had rebuilt more than my relationship with my son. I had rebuilt myself. I had friends again. Real ones. I traveled occasionally. I took classes. I filled my time with things that were not dependent on being needed. I had learned the difference between presence and obligation. I used to be afraid of an empty house, I admitted. Now I see it as space. Leo nodded thoughtfully. I want that too, he said. You have it, I replied. You just don't recognize it yet. Time moved forward, as it always does. Lily graduated high school with honors. She stood tall and confident in her cap and gown, scanning the crowd until she spotted us. My people. She had stopped saying it out loud years ago. But I saw it in the way her eyes softened when they landed on us. At her graduation dinner, she raised her glass unexpectedly. I want to thank Grandma, she said. For teaching Dad how to be strong. And for teaching me that no is a full sentence. The room laughed softly. But my throat tightened. After the celebration, when the house had emptied and the dishes were stacked neatly in the sink, Leo lingered again. She's leaving soon, he said quietly. For college. I reminded him. I know, it just feels like loss, I offered. He nodded. It's not loss, I said gently. It's extension, he exhaled slowly. I never thanked you properly, he added. You have, I said. No. He shook his head. He looked at me fully. If you hadn't stopped paying for everything, if you hadn't pulled back, I know who I'd be right now. Probably still reactive. Still dependent. Still blaming everyone else for my choices. He swallowed. You didn't just save yourself. You forced me to grow up. I smiled faintly. I didn't force you, I said. I stepped out of the way. He let that sink in. Years ago, stepping out of the had felt like abandonment. Now it felt like respect. The house grew quieter after Lily left for college. Leo and Anna adjusted to a new rhythm. I adjusted to another shift. There were days I missed the noise. The backpacks dropped by the door. The hurried mornings. But I did not miss the old fear. I did not miss the version of myself who believed love had to be purchased through sacrifice. One evening long after the sun had set, my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer. Hello. There was a pause. Catherine. The voice was older. Tired. It took me a moment. Isabel, I said calmly. Yes, silence stretched between us. I won't take much of your time, she said finally. I wanted to say something. I waited. I was wrong, she said. The words sounded unfamiliar in her mouth. I was insecure, she continued. I saw your support as control, I saw your presence as competition, and I pushed. I didn't respond immediately. I hurt you, she added. And I hurt Leo. I can see that now. The honesty was quieter than I expected, less defensive. I appreciate you saying that. I replied evenly. I don't expect forgiveness, she said quickly. I just didn't want the story to stay unfinished. I looked out the window into the dark yard. It isn't unfinished, I said gently. It just changed chapters. There was a long breath on the other end. I hope you're well, she said. I am, I answered truthfully. After we hung up, I didn't feel triumph or resentment, just closure. Some apologies come too late to repair what was broken. But they can still acknowledge reality, and that matters. When Leo called the next day, I told him about it. He was quiet for a moment. How did you feel? He asked. Steady, I said. He let out a soft laugh. That's your word, Dal. Yes, I replied. It is. He paused. He said. And I believed him. Sometimes I think back to that original text. You're not invited to dinner. It once felt like a verdict. Now it feels like a pivot point. A single sentence that forced a lifetime of patterns into the light. If I could speak to the woman I was in that kitchen, rosemary on her fingertips, heart cracking quietly in her chest, I would tell her this. You are not losing your son. You are losing the illusion that love must be earned through endless giving. You are not being rejected. You are being redirected. The silence you are about to choose will echo loudly enough to wake everyone involved. And when they wake, they will have a choice. Grow. Or drift away. Some will drift. Some will grow. Your job is not to chase either outcome. Your job is to remain whole. The house is quiet now more often than it is loud. The ledger still sits in the drawer. I haven't opened it in years. I no longer need proof of what I gave. I know what I give now. Time, presence. Guidance when asked. Space when needed. And love that does not bargain with itself. If someone were to text me today and say I wasn't invited somewhere, I would smile softly. Not because it wouldn't hurt. But because I no longer confuse exclusion with worth. I know who I am at the table. And I know I can always set my own. There is a strange tenderness that comes with aging. Not weakness. Not frigidness. The kind that lets you look back without flinching. The kind that lets you see your younger self and feel compassion instead of embarrassment. I am older now than I was the night that message arrived. My hands move slower when I chop herbs. I measure spices by instinct, not precision. The house creaks a little louder in the winter. But the quiet here is not hollow. It is earned. Lily calls me from college sometimes late at night. Grandma, she says, her voice a little breathless. How do you know when someone respects you? I don't rush the answer. You watch how they behave when you disappoint them, I tell her. There's always a pause after that. Because that's when it becomes clear. Respect doesn't disappear when you say no, control does. Leo visits every Sunday now. Not because it's required. Not because it's tradition carved in stone. Because he wants to. He fixes small things around the house without making a performance of it. Changes light bulbs, tightens screws. Brings fresh bread. Sometimes we sit in silence for long stretches. It no longer needs to be filled. One evening, as the sun stretched long across the yard, he asked quietly, "Do you ever feel like you lost years with me?" The question was careful. Vulnerable. Yes, I said honestly. He nodded as if he expected that. But, I continued, we are not entitled to uninterrupted closeness. We are entitled to growth. And growth sometimes costs time. He let that settle. I'm sorry for that time, he said softly. I know, I replied. And I do. Regret is only meaningful when it reshapes behavior. His did. There are moments when I see the boy he was. The way he laughs when something truly surprises him. The way he rubs the back of his neck when he's thinking hard. But I no longer long for that version. The man he became is steadier. More conscious. Less dependent on approval. That's worth the cost. Anna and I have built something gentle between us. Not dramatic. Not overly intimate, just steady warmth. She asks my opinion sometimes. But she does not lean on me for identity. She stands on her own. That is enough. One afternoon years after the original fracture, Leo brought over a small wooden box. I found this while cleaning, he said. Inside were old birthday cards Lily had made when she was little. Crayon hearts, stick figures holding hands. One of them read, "Grandma Strong." I traced the letters with my fingertip. "Do you remember when she said that?" he asked. "Yes," I smiled faintly. "You didn't cry loud," he said. I replied. "Why didn't you?" I thought about that for a moment. "Because strength doesn't need an audience," I said quietly. He looked at me differently after that. Not as his mother, not as his safety net. As a person. That shift is subtle but profound. To be seen as a full human by your child after decades of being their foundation. That is a quiet victory. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the kitchen in the early evening, I think about that text. I can still see it clearly in my mind. The bluntness. The finality. "You're not invited to dinner. I don't want you here." I used to replay it with a sharp edge. Now it feels like a necessary incision. Clean, painful. But life-saving. If I had argued that night, if I had demanded explanations, if I had cried or pleaded or justified my generosity, the pattern would have continued. I would have been invited back. Conditionally. Gratefully. And nothing would have changed. Silence was the only language strong enough to interrupt the cycle. Not the silence of avoidance, the silence of withdrawal. There is power in stepping back without drama. It forces others to face the space you occupied. Years later, Leo told me something that stayed with me. "When you stopped paying for everything," he said, "I thought you were punishing me." "I wasn't," I replied. "I know that now," he said. "You were protecting yourself." "Yes, and forcing me to protect myself too." That's the part people misunderstand. Boundaries don't just protect you. They teach others how to stand. Lily came home from college one summer with new ideas, new opinions, new confidence. She sat at my table one night and said, "Grandma, I think people confuse kindness with access." I smiled slowly. "That's very true. I don't want to make that mistake," she continued. "I want to be kind." "But you won't," I said gently. "Because you watched what happens when someone chooses differently." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You changed our family," she said. "No," I replied softly, "I changed myself." The family adjusted. That is the quiet truth. We cannot control others. We can only control what we continue to participate in. There were nights, back then, when I doubted my choice. When the house felt too still. When I wondered if pride had disguised itself as principle. But every time I considered reaching back out, reaching for the old dynamic, I asked myself one question. Would this restore respect? If the answer was no, I stayed still. Stillness is not weakness. It is discipline. Now, when I cook lamb with rosemary, the scent does not remind me of rejection. It reminds me of awakening. Of the moment I realized love cannot be sustained by money alone. Of the moment I stopped confusing generosity with security. Of the moment I chose self-respect over proximity. Leo once asked me if I regretted funding so much in the beginning. No, I said. Why not? Because I was giving from love. My mistake wasn't the giving. It was the expectation that love alone would guarantee respect. He nodded slowly. That's heavy, he said. It's honest, I replied. Honesty is lighter in the long run. These days I sit on my porch more often in the evenings. The sky shifts through its colors without asking permission. The air cools gently. I do not feel forgotten. I do not feel replaced. I feel complete. And if someone were to ask me what the hardest part of that season was, I would not say the text. I would say the silence that followed. Not the silence I chose. The silence where I had to sit with myself and realize that I had allowed the dynamic to continue for years. Growth requires accountability in both directions. I raised a son who learned, eventually. But I also had to admit that I enabled what hurt me. That realization was sharper than any insult. But it was freeing. Because once you see your part, you can stop repeating it. Lily visited last weekend. She stood in the kitchen chopping vegetables beside me. You know, she said thoughtfully, Dad says you taught him that love should never feel like debt. I'm glad he remembers that, I replied. She smiled. I think I'll remember it too. That is the legacy. Not the money, not the house, not the ledger, the clarity, the steadiness. The understanding that being uninvited is not the same as being unworthy. I have lived long enough now to know this. Love that requires you to shrink is not love. Generosity that demands silence in return is not generosity. And peace that depends on constant self-sacrifice is not peace. The night I stopped paying for everything, I did not know how the story would end. I only knew I could not continue as I was. That was enough, and it still is. As the years continued to gather quietly behind me, I began to understand something I hadn't fully grasped when I was younger. The loudest transformations are rarely the deepest ones. The deepest ones happen in kitchens, in parked cars. In moments when no one is watching and you choose differently than you did before. Lily graduated from college on a bright, windy afternoon. She stood on that stage confident, composed, her name called clearly into a microphone that carried across the stadium. When she found us in the crowd afterward, she didn't run like she used to. She walked. Steady. She hugged her father first, then Anna, then me. And when she wrapped her arms around me, she held on a little longer than necessary. You set the tone, she whispered. For what? I asked. For how we treat each other. That sentence settled deep. Later that evening, the three of us sat at my dining table again, Leo, Lily, and Eitz. Cleared, dessert forgotten while conversation drifted. Do you ever think about that dinner? Lily asked suddenly. Leo laughed softly. She's heard the story. Not all of it, Lily said. Just that there was a turning point. I looked at my son. He gave a small nod. It was a text, I said simply. What did it say? She asked. Leo exhaled. It said Grandma wasn't invited. Lily frowned. Why? Because sometimes people confuse boundaries with control. I answered gently, and sometimes they mistake generosity for obligation. Lily leaned back in her chair, absorbing that. And you just stopped. Les. Weren't you scared? Yes. Of what? That I would lose him. She glanced at her father. But you didn't. No, I said. Because when something is built on truth, it can survive distance. Leo reached for his water glass, quiet. I had to decide who I was without leaning on her. He added. Lily pressed. And I didn't like who I saw at first. He admitted. Silence settled softly between us. But I changed. He finished, I said quietly. You did. There is something sacred about hearing your child acknowledge growth, without defensiveness. It feels like watching a tree you once shielded from wind stand firm on its own. Years ago, I feared being unnecessary. Now I understand that being unnecessary is the goal. It means you've done your job well. One autumn afternoon, long after the dust of that old conflict had fully settled, I found myself back at the same counter where it had all begun. Rosemary between my fingers, garlic under my knife, the phone resting nearby. But this time, it was Leo texting me. Dinner at our place tonight, you coming? I smiled at the simplicity of it. Not an obligation. Not a financial arrangement. An invitation. Yes, I replied. When I arrived, Lily opened the door. You're just in time, she said. Dad overcooked the chicken. Lou groaned from the kitchen. It's not overcooked. It's well done. We laughed. Anna kissed my cheek and handed me a glass of wine. There was no tension in the air. No unspoken expectations, just warmth. Midway through dinner, Leo raised his glass casually. To Mom, he said. I raised an eyebrow. For what this time? For showing me that love without respect collapses. And that respect without boundaries doesn't exist. I held his gaze. And had added softly. I didn't stay. I corrected gently. I returned when it was safe to. He nodded. That's fair. Lily leaned forward. Grandma. If you hadn't stopped paying for everything, would we still be like this? I considered the question honestly. No, I said. Why not? Because nothing would have changed. There it was again. Change requires interruption, and interruption requires courage. Not loud courage. Not dramatic courage. Quiet courage. The kind that sits still when everything inside you wants to fix. The kind that resists the urge to rescue. The kind that trusts others to rise, or fall, on their own. Later that night, as I drove home under a sky scattered with stars, I realized something unexpected. I no longer felt defined by that moment. It was no longer the center of my story. It was simply a chapter. Important, transformative, but not everything. The house greeted me with its familiar quiet. I moved through it slowly, turning off lights, adjusting curtains, pausing in the kitchen. For a brief moment, I imagined the old version of myself standing there. The woman whose heart had tightened around 12 sharp words. If I could speak to her now, I would say, "You are stronger than you think. You are not being erased. You are being invited into a different version of yourself. And it will be worth it." Time has softened Isabel too, from what I hear. Distance can do that. Experience can do that. We do not speak often, but when we do, there is no venom left. Just history. History is easier to hold when it no longer defines your present. Leo once told me that the hardest part of growth was admitting he had been wrong without blaming anyone else. I wanted it to be someone's fault. He said, "Sometimes it is." I replied, "But fault and responsibility are not the same thing." He understood, but now, an understanding is what endures. As I prepare meals these days, I no longer measure ingredients with the precision I once did. I trust my hands, trust my instincts, trust the balance. Boundaries are like seasoning. Too little, and everything tastes bland. Too much, and it becomes bitter. But when it's right, you don't notice it. You just feel at ease. That is what our family feels like now. Not dramatic. Not perfect. Balanced. The ledger remains in the drawer. I keep it not as a record of debt, but as a reminder of transformation. Every entry represents love given freely. Every blank page after that night represents love given wisely. There is a difference. If someone were to ask me what I gained by stopping the payments, I would not say power. I would not say revenge. I would say clarity. Clarity about who I was. Clarity about how love should feel. It should not feel transactional. It should not feel conditional. It should not feel like survival. It should feel steady. Like coming home without wondering if you're welcome. And that is what I have now. Not because I demanded it, but because I refused to fund anything less. And that refusal changed everything. There are mornings now when I wake before the sun and lie still, listening to the house breathe. The refrigerator hums. The pipes shift faintly in the walls. The wind brushes softly against the siding. It is an ordinary symphony, one I used to mistake for emptiness. It isn't empty. It is mine. I move through the kitchen slowly, making coffee the way I always have, measured, deliberate. I no longer rush toward anyone else's schedule. My time feels owned, not borrowed. That ownership is something I didn't understand when I was younger. I thought love meant availability at all hours. I thought sacrifice proved devotion. I thought being indispensable was the highest form of connection. I was wrong. Indispensable people are rarely respected. They are relied upon. There is a difference. Leo came by last week with a snow and a stack of paperwork. He said, "Better. Rate." He spread the documents across my table, not for me to solve but to share. Ran the numbers, he added. "I've got it covered." "I never doubted that," I replied. He looked up, studying me carefully. "There was a time when I would have just assumed you'd step in if something fell short," he admitted. "I know," I said gently. "I don't want that version of me back." "You won't. Growth, once integrated, does not vanish. It becomes part of your posture." Later that afternoon Lily called. "Grandma, I got the internship," she said breathlessly. "That's wonderful," I replied. "It's unpaid." There was a small pause. "Do you want it?" I asked. "Yes, it's exactly what I want to do." "Then you'll figure it out." She exhaled, relieved. "Dad said the same thing." I smiled. What did you expect him to say? That he'd just cover everything. And he said he'll support me emotionally, but I need to contribute. There it was again. The quiet ripple of that long ago boundary. "Does that feel fair?" I asked. "Yes," she said thoughtfully. It feels empowering. Empowering. That word used to sound sharp to me, like rebellion, like defiance. Now it sounds like alignment. There was a time when I feared that stepping back would create distance I could never close. But what it created instead was respect strong enough to bridge anything. One evening, Leo stayed late after dinner. The sky outside was streaked in soft purple and gold. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't stopped?" he asked. I said, "What do you think?" I leaned back in my chair, imagining it. "I think you would have grown resentful," I said slowly. "Not because I gave, but because you would have known, deep down, that you hadn't earned what you had." He nodded. "And I would have grown bitter," I added. "Not because I gave, but because I wouldn't have been respected." He exhaled. "We would have destroyed each other quietly," he said. Less. There was no drama in that realization now, no sharp edges, just truth, and truth, when faced honestly, loses its sting. The older I get, the more I understand that love is not proven by how much you endure. It is proven by how clearly you communicate what you will and will not accept. That clarity saved us. It saved him from complacency. It saved me from erasure. It saved Lily from inheriting confusion. Last month, Lily invited me to speak to a small group at her university. A seminar on family systems and personal boundaries. She wanted me to share my story, she said. I stood at the front of that classroom, looking at faces young and uncertain, hungry for guidance. I once confused generosity with security, I told them. They listened quietly. I believed that if I made myself indispensable, I would never be excluded. A few heads nodded. But indispensability creates imbalance, I continued. And imbalance breeds resentment. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't villainize anyone. I simply described the moment I stopped participating in my own diminishment. When you withdraw from a dynamic that disrespects you, I said, you are not abandoning love. You are testing whether it was real. Afterward, several students approached me. How did you handle the silence? One asked. By remembering that discomfort is not the same as danger, I replied. That distinction changed my life. Discomfort is growth knocking. Danger is something else entirely. I had been uncomfortable for years before that text arrived. I just didn't recognize it. Now, when discomfort appears, I examine it instead of silencing it. Leo tells me he does the same. We don't talk about the past often anymore, not because it's forbidden, but because it no longer defines us. It shaped us. There's a difference. Sometimes, late at night, I sit with a cup of tea and reflect on how easily things could have gone another way. I could have responded to that message with anger. I could have demanded apology. I could have shown up uninvited and forced confrontation. Instead, I chose withdrawal. Not to punish, but to protect, and protection is not cruelty. It is self-preservation. Self-preservation allowed room for transformation. Transformation allowed reconciliation. Reconciliation built something new. Not the old dynamic repaired. A new one created. That distinction matters. Leo once said something that has stayed with me. You didn't just teach me how to treat you, he said. You taught me how to treat myself. That is the quiet miracle of boundaries. They radiate outward. They don't just alter one relationship. They recalibrate identity. Lily, now stepping fully into her own adulthood, carries that calibration with her. She chooses friends carefully. She walks away from situations that feel unbalanced. She asks directly for what she needs. And she does not apologize for existing. When she visits, she still hugs me tightly. But she does not cling. That too is a sign of health. There are still moments when life feels uncertain. When health concerns flicker at the edges. When time feels more precious than abundant. But I do not fear being alone anymore. I do not fear being uninvited. Because I no longer build my worth on access. The night I stopped paying for everything, I did not become colder. I became clearer. Clarity can look like distance to those who benefited from confusion. But to those willing to grow, it looks like invitation. An invitation to step up. To stand steady. To meet love as an equal. And now when I set my table, whether for one or for many, I do so without hesitation. Not waiting to be included. Not bracing to be excluded. Just present. Just whole. Just steady. Time moves differently when you stop measuring your worth by how much you are needed. I noticed it first in my mornings. There was a period in my life when mornings meant planning. Who needed what call? What problem might appear? Now mornings are simply mornings. I water the small rosemary plant on my kitchen window. The same herb that once clung to my fingertips on that day. It has grown thick and green, stubbornly alive despite winter. Sometimes I speak to it quietly, not because I believe plants understand words, but because I understand presence. Leo came over one Saturday with Lily and Anna. They brought picnic food and insisted we sit in the backyard, even though the air was still cool. Lily sprawled on the grass reading a book for school. Anna handed me a sandwich. "You don't have to eat first," she said. "But I made it the way you like." Small acts. That is how trust feels now. Leo watched Lily quietly for a long time. "She's going to move away one day," he said.
"Yes," I replied.
"How do you do that?" he asked. "Do what?" "Watch them grow without trying to hold them back." I thought about the answer. "You love the adult they are becoming more than you fear the child you are losing," I said finally. He nodded slowly. "I used to think love meant protection from pain," he admitted. "And now I think love means teaching someone they can survive pain. That is the hardest lesson for parents. Not solving suffering. Preparing children to walk through it." The sun shifted slowly across the yard while we sat in comfortable silence. Then Lily suddenly sat up. "Grandma," she said, "I think I want to study psychology." "Why?" I asked. "Because I want to understand why people hurt people they love." I smiled. "Good reason. Dad says I ask too many questions." "Your father used to ask too many questions too," I said. Leo groaned. "I did, absolutely did," I told him. He laughed. It was a deep, relaxed sound. The kind that used to be rare. Later, after they left, I sat alone on the porch watching the sunset bleed softly into the hills. I thought about Isabel. We have not spoken again since that phone call years ago. I do not feel hatred toward her. If anything, I feel something closer to distance, compassion. People who fight for control are usually afraid of being irrelevant. I understand that fear. I lived with it once. But I chose a different response. Instead of fighting to remain central, I chose to remain whole. That choice changed everything. Last winter I had a minor surgery. Nothing serious. Age-related maintenance, the doctor called it. Leo sat beside my hospital bed, even told him he didn't need to. "You would have done the same for me," he said. "Yes," I replied. "And I want to do it for you now." That was all. No financial issue, no emotional bargaining. Just presence. While I recovered, Lily sent me voice messages from college. "Grandma, drink your water. Grandma, don't read too much at night. Grandma, Dad said I inherited your stubbornness and I should be proud of it." I laughed when I heard that. Stubbornness saved me. But only after I learned to aim it inward rather than outward. There is a difference between stubbornly holding on to people and stubbornly holding on to your own dignity. I chose the second. Sometimes I think about the version of myself who feared being excluded. She was not weak. She was exhausted. Exhaustion makes people accept disrespect because resistance feels heavier than surrender. But exhaustion is not destiny. Recovery is possible. I see it in my son. I see it in my granddaughter. I see it in myself. A few months ago, Leo asked me something unexpected while we were washing dishes after dinner. "Mom," he said, "do you feel vindicated?" I dried my hands slowly. "No," I said. "Why not?" "Because vindication requires an enemy," I replied. "I don't carry enemies anymore." He was quiet for a long time. "That's probably healthier," he said. "The house is quieter now than it was when I was younger. But it is not lonely. Loneliness is not determined by the number of voices around you. It is determined by whether those voices see you as a person or as a resource. I am surrounded by people who see me. Not perfectly, not always. But honestly, and that is enough. Sometimes late at night, I imagine speaking to the woman who sent that text all those years ago. I would not accuse her. I would not argue. I would simply say, "You were afraid of being overshadowed. I was afraid of being forgotten." Neither of us understood that love cannot survive when fear is the primary language. And then I would add one more thing. Children grow best when parents learn to stand without leaning. Because when parents stand, children learn to stand too. The rosemary still grows by my window. Its scent is stronger now than it was that day. When I brush my fingers against it, I remember the beginning. Not with pain, but with clarity. I was not rejected. I was awakened, and my story did not end when I was uninvited. It truly began when I stopped trying to earn a seat at a table I helped build. I am older now. Not old in the dramatic sense people write about in novels, but old in the quiet way that makes movement slower and thought longer. The rosemary plant by my kitchen window has grown thick and unruly. I no longer trim it as carefully as I once did. I let it spread because it seems happier that way. Leo visits less frequently than before, not because anything is wrong, but because his life is full in a different way now. That is the natural order. Children grow into adults. Adults grow into their own households. And parents must learn to occupy space without occupying attention. Anna and Leo bought a house near the coast last year. They invited me to visit. The ocean was loud and endless, stretching beyond anything I had ever owned or controlled. I stood on the sand for a long time without speaking. Leo stood beside me. "Do you like it?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "It reminds me of boundaries." He smiled. "The sea." "Less. Because the ocean is powerful precisely because it knows where land begins and ends. It does not try to be both." Later, we sat on the balcony of their house watching the sunset melt into water. Lily was there too, now grown into a young woman with sharp intelligence and gentle eyes. She asked me something I had been expecting. "Grandma, do you think people can change completely?" I considered the question carefully. "No," I said. "But people can change their direction." She nodded slowly. "Dad says he used to live like he was afraid of losing everyone. And now?" I ask. "He says he learned that losing people who require you to disappear is not loss." I closed my eyes briefly. "Good." He remembered. That is enough. That evening, Leo walked with me along the shoreline. The wind was cold but not uncomfortable. "Mom," he said suddenly. "Do you remember that night I knocked on your door after Isabel left?" "Yes, I was terrified you would reject me." "I know." He looked down at the sand. "I thought I was coming home." "And you were home," he said quietly. "But you didn't let me move in with learning how to live there properly." I stopped walking. "That's the best way I can hear that," I said softly. He smiled. We stood there for a long time, listening to the ocean breathe. After a while, he said, "I think Lily will be stronger than both of us." "I hope so." I replied. "No." "Why not?" "Because strong children are the legacy of parents who survived their own mistakes." He didn't speak for a while after that. The night I turned 80 arrived quietly. No large celebration, just family dinner at Leo's house. Anna cooked. Lily set the table. Leo cut the cake even though he insisted he was bad at it. The candles flickered gently. They sang. I closed my eyes and listened. When the song ended, Lily spoke first. "We wanted to tell you something," she said. I waited. "You taught us that love is not access," she continued. "It's respect," Leo added, "and that giving without boundaries is not generosity," Anna said. "And that peace is something you build by deciding what you will not tolerate." I felt tears gather quietly. Not lied tears. The kind that sit warm behind the eyes. "I am proud of all of you," I said. "And we are proud of you," Leo replied. After dinner, I sat alone on the porch while the others cleaned inside. The air was soft. The world felt slow. I thought about my husband who had died years earlier, before all of this. I thought about the younger version of myself who believed love meant endurance. If I could speak to her now, I would say, do not confuse endurance with devotion. You are not a tree planted to be used as shade. You are a living person who deserves sunlight. Leo came out later and sat beside me. "Are you tired?" he asked. "Yes," I said honestly. But not empty, I added. He nodded. That's good. Life doesn't have to feel dramatic to be meaningful, I said. I know, he replied. Silence returned. Comfortable. Settled. At some point he said, very softly. I understood immediately. Stopping the payments. Stopping the cycle. Stopping the version of myself who believed love required erasure. You don't have to thank me, I said. I do, he insisted. Because he knew what that decision cost me, and what it saved him. The next morning I walked slowly into the kitchen and touched the rosemary plant again. The scent rose gently, strong, persistent, alive. I realized something then. The story was never really about a daughter-in-law text. It was about a woman learning that love does not require surrender of self. It was about a son learning that peace is not inherited. It is built. It was about a granddaughter learning boundaries before pain taught them. And it was about me learning that being excluded from someone's table does not remove me from the world. I am still here. I still cook. I still laugh quietly at small things. I still love my son, my granddaughter, and the life I built after choosing myself. If someone were to send me that message again today, "You're not invited to dinner," I would not feel the old tightening in my chest. I would place my rosemary beside the stove, wash my hands, and smile. Because I know now I need an invitation to live. I only need permission from the woman I have become. And she has never once refused me. I am sitting near the window now. Age has softened my body the way rain softens stone. Movement is slower. Breathing is quieter. Memories sometimes arrive without being summoned. Like birds landing briefly on a branch before flying again. Leo visits every Sunday, without fail. Even when the weather is bad, even when he is tired, even when his own life is busy, he brings bread sometimes fruit, sometimes nothing at all except conversation. Presence is enough. Anna often sits with us. She has grown into someone I trust deeply, not because she tries to please me, but because she does not perform kindness. Authenticity is the highest form of safety. Lily comes less frequently now because she is building her own world. She works in human development research. She studies family systems. She tells me that she wants to help people understand the invisible wounds that pass silently between generations. You inspired this, she said once. No, I told her. I gave you the freedom to find it. She smiled because she understood the difference. Freedom is not direction. Freedom is possibility. One afternoon, Leo sat across from me and said something unexpected. I think I finally understand Isabel, he said. I waited. She was terrified of being replaceable. That fear is common, I replied. She tried to control love because she believed love was unstable. He continued. Yes. Silence followed. Do you hate her? He asked quietly. Why not? Because hatred key connected to someone I have already left. He nodded slowly. Have you forgiven her? I thought about it. I have released her from the story I carry. I said carefully. That is not the same as reconciliation. He accepted that. True forgiveness does not require reunion, it requires internal peace. A year later, I received a letter, not email, not text, a real envelope, slightly yellowed, addressed in handwriting I recognized. It was from Isabel. Catherine, I am not writing to ask for anything. I am writing because I realized I never understood you. I thought you were competing with me for Leo's attention. I thought your help was control. I was wrong. I was afraid of losing him. And I attacked the thing I feared losing. I know it is too late to repair what was broken. But I wanted you to know that I am trying to become someone who does not hurt people out of fear. I hope Lily grows into a woman who is not afraid of strength. I hope you are well, Isabel. I folded the letter slowly. Then I placed it in the same red folder where the ledger once rested. Not as victory. Not as defeat. As history. I told Leo about it. He listened quietly. What did you feel? He asked. I said and I meant it. The ocean is still my favorite place. I visit once a year with the family. I stand at the edge and feel the wind push gently against me. The sea does not ask whether I belong. It simply exists beside me. That is the kind of world I learned to build inside my own life. On my 85th birthday, the family gathered again. This time the celebration was smaller, more intimate. Time tends to shrink gatherings as people grow older. Lily spoke first. Ranma taught me that love is not about never being hurt, she said. It is about not allowing hurt to define your identity. Leo added. She taught me that being a good man means standing even when standing is uncomfortable. Anna said. She taught us that generosity without self-respect is not kindness. I listened quietly. Then I spoke. I was not always wise, I said. Lauder moved gently around the table. I made mistakes, I continued. I loved in ways that made me invisible. I feared loneliness more than I valued myself. I paused. But I learned that love does not require erasure. I looked at each of them. My greatest hope is that none of you ever believe you must disappear to be loved. Later that night, after everyone left, Leo helped me walk to the bedroom. You are getting slower, he said gently. I replied. Are you afraid? I thought about it. No. Why not? Because I have lived a life where I chose myself without losing love. He kissed my forehead before leaving. Sleep well, Mom. That night I lay in bed listening to the quiet house breathe around me. I thought about the younger woman who once stood in a kitchen with rosemary on her fingers and a message in her hand. She was frightened. She thought exclusion meant abandonment. She thought giving more would guarantee love. If I could touch her shoulder now, I would say, you are about to learn that love that requires you to shrink is not love. You will be uninvited, and it will hurt. But that pain will open the door to peace. Do not rush to fill silence. Let it speak, let it teach. You are not a wallet. You are not an obligation. You are not interference. You are a person who deserves a seat at your own table. The morning comes slowly when you are old. Sunlight moves across the floor like something alive. I wake. Make coffee, water the rosemary. And sometimes I imagine Lily, decades from now, standing in her own kitchen teaching someone the same lesson. Boundaries are not walls. They are the architecture of respect. And love that survives boundaries is the only love worth keeping. If this story has a moral, it is simply: do not pay for love with your disappearance. Because the world does not become kinder when you shrink. It becomes kinder when you stand. And I have spent the rest of my life standing. I am very old now. Not in the way people speak about youth fading dramatically, but in the quiet way time settles into bones and breath. My hair is almost completely silver. My steps are measured. Some mornings my hands tremble slightly when I hold the coffee cup, though the trembling does not hurt. Leo worries about it. Mom, you should let me handle breakfast, he says sometimes. I enjoy doing it, I reply. Independence is not about strength alone. It is about dignity inside weakness. The rosemary plant has grown wild and beautiful. I stopped trimming it years ago. It spills over the window like green memory. Sometimes Lily visits and touches it before saying hello. She learned that habit from me. Patterns carry love silently. Last month, the doctor told me my heart was slowing. Not dangerously, just naturally. Like a river preparing for winter. Leo heard the news first and sat beside my bed for a long time without speaking. Finally he said, I am not ready. I smiled. No one is, I told him. He took my hand. Did you ever regret stopping the payments? He asked suddenly. I knew what he meant. The night of the text. The ledger. The silence. I thought about it carefully. No, I said. Not even once. He closed his eyes briefly. I used to think you chose pride over family, he admitted. And now? I asked. Now I think you chose love over fear. That was enough. Love does not mean preserving every relationship. Sometimes love means allowing people to grow into the consequences of their behavior. Anna visits every week now. Bringing tea and sitting quietly beside me while reading. She told me something once that stayed with me. You were not a mother-in-law who tried to own the family, she said. You were a mother who learned when to release. I think that is the best description of my life. Release is not abandonment. Release is trust in the other person's capacity to stand. One afternoon, Lily came alone. She sat on the porch steps with me. Grandchildren grow into friends when love is steady. Grandma, she said softly, I am thinking about starting a family someday. I believe you will be a wonderful mother. I replied. But I am scared of repeating patterns. I smiled. Fear is good if it makes you conscious, I said. Not if it makes you frozen. She leaned her head on my shoulder. How do I know I am loving correctly? She asked. I thought about it. You are loving correctly when the people you love do not have to disappear to stay with you. She did not speak for a long time after that. The winter I turned 90 arrived quietly. Snow covered the yard like silence made visible. Leo spent more nights at my house. Not out of obligation. Out of companionship. Sometimes he read aloud from books I liked. Sometimes we just sat. Presence became the language between us. One night, he asked, Mom, are you afraid of dying? I answered honestly. No. Why not? Because I have already built what I needed to leave behind. He cried quietly after that, not loudly. Just tears falling without sound. People think strength means absence of tears. It does not. Strength means tears do not control your direction. The day I felt the end approaching was very calm. I called Leo and Lily. Anna was already there. I asked them to sit around my bed. The rosemary scent was faint in the air, because Lily had brought a small branch and placed it near the window. I spoke slowly. I want to say something important. They listened. I did not raise you to be people who never feel pain. I paused. I raised you to be people who do not betray yourselves to avoid it. Leo squeezed my hand. I am proud of you, I told him, for growing into a man who stands without fear of losing me. He cried then. Lily said, Grandma, I think your story will help people. I shook my head slightly. My story is not about me, I said. It is about what happens when someone decides they are worth keeping. The room became very quiet. Outside, the snow kept falling soft, patient, like the world forgiving itself. Later, when they thought I was sleeping, I heard Leo whisper to Lily, She changed us. And Lily answered, No. She showed us who we could be. That is the greatest legacy. Not transformation by force. Transformation by example. That night dreamed of the kitchen from long ago. Rosemary on my fingers. The buzzing phone. The sentence that began everything. You're not invited to dinner. In the dream I did not feel hurt. I felt peace. Because I understood something my younger self did not. I was never meant to fight for a place at someone else's table. I was meant to build a life where I was already sitting. The morning I died was very gentle. There was light through the curtains. Leo was holding my hand. Lily was reading quietly beside the bed. Anna was humming softly. I felt no fear. Only gratitude. I thought briefly of the woman I used to be, the one who believed love required endless giving. I hoped she was proud. My last conscious thought was simple. I lived, I learned, I stood, and I loved without disappearing. After I was gone, Leo planted a rosemary bush in the backyard. Every year, when it blooms strong and green, Lily tells her own children, This is Grandma's plant. And she adds quietly, She taught us that love should never ask you to vanish. The wind moves through the leaves. The scent rises. And somewhere, in the quiet architecture of memory, a woman who was once excluded from a dinner is still sitting at her own table. Uninvited by others, but always welcomed by herself. The rosemary bush grew stronger every year. Leo visited it every Sunday morning, even after I was gone. He said he could still feel the house breathe when he stood near the window where it grew. Time has a strange way of preserving love inside habits. Lily planted her own small rosemary pot in her apartment when she moved to the city to begin her work in family psychology. She was 32 when she published her first book. The title was simple. Love Without Disappearance. Inside the dedication page, she wrote to Grandma Catherine. You taught me that I do not have to shrink to be loved. People said the book changed conversations about family boundaries. Lily did not see it as revolution. She saw it as remembrance. One evening, she sat alone in her apartment looking at a photograph of her grandmother cooking at the kitchen counter, rosemary on her fingertips, peace in her eyes. Lily spoke softly, as if the photo could hear her. I think I understand you now. She paused. I used to think your story was about standing up to people who hurt you. She shook her head. But it was actually about learning that love cannot survive when fear owns the relationship. She closed the frame gently. In her career, Lily worked with families where parents paid for children's lives emotionally, financially, and psychologically in ways that created invisible debts. She told them something she learned from Catherine. Children should not feel they owe their parents' survival. Many parents cried when they heard that. Some resisted, but some changed. Patterns break slowly, not violently, like ice melting in sunlight. At 38, Lily married a man named Daniel. He was quiet, thoughtful, and had a habit of listening more than speaking. On their wedding day, Lily placed a small rosemary sprig inside her bouquet. During the ceremony, she said something unexpected in her vows. I promise to love you without asking you to disappear. Daniel smiled because he understood. Years later, when their first child was born, they named her Catherine. Not because they wanted to repeat the past, but because they wanted the memory of strength to continue. Little Catherine grew up hearing stories. Not stories of revenge, but stories of clarity. She would sit beside Lily and ask, did Grandma ever fight anyone? And Lily would answer, she fought fear. Did she win? Yes. How? She stopped paying for things that hurt her. The child would think about this carefully. Is that hard? Yes, Lily would say, but freedom usually is. When little Catherine turned 10, she asked something very serious. Mommy, how do I know if someone loves me? Lily answered the way her grandmother once taught her. You watch how they treat you when you say no. The child nodded slowly, as if storing the lesson somewhere deep and safe. Across generations, the story lived not as trauma but as architecture. The family became known among friends for something unusual. They were kind. But they were not easily used. They helped people willingly. But they never helped in ways that required their dignity to shrink. At 70, Lily published her second book. The dedication read, to the woman who taught our family that love is not a transaction. The reviews called it compassionate and psychologically insightful. Lily never called it her work alone. She said it was continuation. Sometimes, on quiet nights, she would sit on her balcony and imagine her grandmother sitting beside her. Not speaking, just present, like the ocean, like rosemary wind. One winter evening, Lily spoke softly into the night. Grandma, I hope I am living the lesson correctly. The wind moved gently. She felt, rather than heard, the answer inside her heart. You are. Because you do not disappear to keep love. You do not buy acceptance with silence. You do not confuse generosity with obligation. You stand. And you love from there. The story of Catherine became more than family memory. It became teaching. In universities, therapists referenced it without knowing her name. In homes, children learned to say no without fear. In marriages, partners learned that respect must be mutual or it is not love. The rosemary plant in the old house grew until it touched the window frame. Leo refused to trim it. Let it live, he said. Because he believed it was her way of still being present. When the sunlight was soft and the air carried herbal scent, he felt something like peace settle in his chest. Not sadness. Not longing, just quiet gratitude. And sometimes, very faintly, he remembered the kitchen. The text. The silence. The woman who chose herself and saved them all. There comes a time when stories stop being about events and start being about meaning. For Lily, that time arrived when she was old enough to sit with silence and not feel compelled to fill it. She was 80, when she felt her grandmother's presence most clearly. Not as a voice, not as a memory that spoke, but as a certainty inside her chest. The rosemary plant had grown beyond the window frame now. It climbed gently along the wall. Strong and persistent, its scent carried by wind and sunlight. People who visited the old house sometimes asked why the plant was never removed. Leo always answered the same way. Because it reminds us who we became. One autumn afternoon, Lily, her great-granddaughter Catherine, to the house. The child was curious and bright-eyed. She ran directly to the rosemary bush. "Mommy, why is this plant so big?" she asked. "Because it was allowed to grow," Lily replied. "Did Grandma plant it?" "Les." The child touched the leaves gently. "It smells like cooking," she said. Lily smiled. "It smells like home." They sat on the porch steps together. After a long silence, the child asked something unexpected. "Did Grandma ever cry?" "Yes," Lily said. When she realized she had been giving more than she was respected for. "Was she sad?" Did she stop loving people?" "No." "What did she do?" "She stopped loving in ways that made her disappear." The child thought about this. "Is that why our family is different?" "Yes." The wind moved softly through the rosemary. Lily continued, very gently. "Grandma believed love should make you more visible, not less." Years had passed since Catherine's death, but the family spoke of her not as a lost figure, but as a continuing influence. On birthdays, they placed a rosemary sprig beside the cake. Not as ritual, but as reminder. Respect is the soil where love grows. That evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Lily spoke one last time to the empty air, quietly enough that the child almost did not hear. "Thank you, Grandma, for teaching that exclusion does not define worth. For showing us that generosity without dignity is not kindness. For proving that silence can be strength when it protects the self. For stopping when love became obedience." The child leaned against her. "Mommy," she said, "I want to be strong like Grandma." Lily smiled. "You already are," she said. "Because strength is not loud. It is the ability to say no without hatred. To give without losing yourself. To love without fear." The story of Catherine did not end in victory. It did not end in revenge. It did not end in reconciliation alone. It ended in something quieter. Balance. A family that learned across generations that love is not measured by how much one person sacrifices, but by how safely everyone can exist. And sometimes, on very quiet mornings, when the wind moves through rosemary leaves and sunlight rests gently on old wooden floors, someone in that family will pause for no obvious reason. They will breathe slowly. And they will feel, without needing proof, that the woman who was once told, "You are not invited to dinner," is still sitting at the table she built herself. And she has never once left it. There is a place in human memory where stories do not continue as events. They continue as atmosphere. The old house eventually passed into Lily's name. Not because she demanded it, not because Leo feared losing it, but because they decided, together, that the house belonged to the lesson more than the property. The legal documents were simple. No conflict, no argument, no ledger. Only agreement. On the day Lily signed the papers, she stood in the kitchen alone for a long time. The rosemary plant had grown so large it nearly touched the ceiling. She placed her hand gently on the wall beside it. "I will protect you," she whispered to the house. Not to the plant, but to the meaning inside it. In her professional work, Lily often told young adults something her grandmother had never said directly, but lived every day. You are allowed to walk away from love that requires your disappearance. Some students cried when they heard it, because many of them had never been told that safety was more important than access. One winter evening, Lily sat with her daughter Catherine on the porch. Snow fell slowly, patient and quiet. The child asked, "Mommy, will Grandma be forgotten one day?" Lily shook her head. "Why not?" "Because we live like she taught us." The child thought about this. "So Grandma is inside us?" "Yes," Lily said softly. "In the way we treat each other." The child nodded seriously. "Then I will not be mean when I am sad," she said. Lily smiled. "Good." Silence followed, comfortable and warm. The wind moved gently across the snow. Lily felt something she could not explain in words, not grief, not longing, not nostalgia. Something closer to continuity. Generations are not separate stories. They are the same river moving forward. That night, before going inside, Lily spoke more into the quiet air. "Grandma, we are still here." Not as a plea. Not as sorrow. But as acknowledgement. The rosemary leaves moved faintly in the wind. And somewhere inside the living memory of the family, the woman who once chose silence over surrender rested in the knowledge that her lesson had taken root. Love does not require you to be invited, but respect ensures you will always have a place. And the greatest gift a parent or grandparent can give is not safety from pain. It is the knowledge that even when you are excluded, you are never required to vanish. The story of Catherine did not end. It simply grew quiet. And in quiet places, it continues to live.